loose and set me free. You make me win in every way. You showed me how to spread my wings. Yes, I'm the winner of the day.
Real Women, Real Life. We're super excited to be back again for our next episode. Our guest today is Mandi Frantz. She's coming to us from New York. She is a disability advocate and she works in a nonprofit with children with disabilities, helping them become active and stay active in their community. So we're super excited to have you today, Mandi. Thanks so much for connecting with us. And can you give us a little brief bio about yourself?
Sure. Well, thank you both for having me. I am the executive director of an organization called KEEN New York. KEEN stands for Kids Enjoy Exercise Now. And our focus is on getting children and young adults active and healthy. Really, we've learned that there's a really disparity with people who have disabilities having access to gyms and really just being able to maintain an active lifestyle, and the obesity rate among young people with disabilities is significantly higher. So our organization focuses on giving youth access to fitness and exercise programs. Because we work with young children, we do a lot of that through sports and play. So basketball programs, swimming, yoga, all kinds of different physical activities.
That's awesome. That sounds like a lot of fun and probably a really cool place to work, to being able to always stay active and plan events and things like that. That sounds like fun. So today, I know we want to touch a little bit on some of your community work as a disability advocate, but you had brought a topic to us that I thought was really interesting, and I felt like us as Real Women could really use the conversation. So we were going to talk about today a little bit about inclusion in the church space or our faith base, right? And kind of talk about what that looks like. So since you brought the topic to us, I'm very interested to kind of hear where you are with that and what that looks like for you.
Sure. So this is a topic that is personally important to me. So I am someone who's in the faith, and I've been to a number of different churches and had various experiences in the different churches that I have been in. And so I have just a really big kind of personal mission of wanting to make sure that people with disabilities are included in the church. And I think that traditionally there have been a lot of barriers, as with many things, right? There have been a lot of barriers to people being included in the church. And I think one of the kind of most difficult or saddest things is that, for me, I believe the church is a space where everyone should feel like they're welcome and where they have a place. Of all the places we go, I feel like that should be the one place that people go and feel welcome and feel like they belong. And I know that we have made, as a church body, we've made a lot of progress, but I still think that there is kind of this one directional mindset. And I would say that that's probably the biggest challenge for a lot of churches who are doing inclusion, where they have a very service-based mindset. So people who come into the church that have disabilities are viewed as people who are in need of charity or who need service. And there's not a lot of opportunity for people with disabilities to be active leaders or be the ones who are serving in the church space. So that's really where my focus is on trying to help shift that mindset in church communities, especially within my own church, and trying to help them see how different things, from attitudinal barriers to physical barriers to pretty much any barrier that we can put up, really hinders people from disabilities from being truly included in the church.
I think that I agree. I think that's it was one of the things that came. I had not really, till you brought the topic up, I had not really thought about it a whole lot, even though I'd been in the church for my entire life. But the idea of the fact that people with disabilities are looked at as those who are supposed to be served rather than those who can serve, and not only serve but be leaders in service. And I think for me, one of the primary things in the worship space is that it's hard for us as people, and I'm just speaking as people with mobility impairments, because mobility impairments are represented 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 here. But the idea of being able to like get up on the altar space, or to be able to read from scripture, or to be able to do, like, I know some churches have spiritual dance troops that are part of their worship, and like, so I think that we deserve to be able to be a part of every angle of, that kind of service, like mission trips and stuff like that. And I know that I'm a service-minded individual, and I'm always wanting to go on mission trips and do these things. But then I'm like, well, how accessible is the actual, whatever country you're going to serve in, and would they have, even if I got a manual chair, would the roads be, would I have to bring extra people with me just to take care of me? I mean, there's things to have to consider there that, so.
Yeah, 100%. Those are like all the kinds of things that I really kind of talk about. And, I'm really blessed to be a part of a church where the leadership at my church is very open to learning, which is really great. I know that in itself can be difficult for some churches, because a lot of, I think, church theology is really built on tradition. And so it can be really hard for churches to be open to changing the way that they have done things for many, many years. But I am blessed to be a part of a church that is very open. Their leadership is very open. The pastor has, shared posts that I've made, has changed things already within the church as a result of things that I have suggested or things that I've said. But, you talked about big things like, the mission or the altar, and I've definitely thought of all of those things as well and talk about those things. But even some of the, like, I guess what are more basic or like traditional worship practices are things that I address as well. I recently shared a story on my Facebook page about attending one of my church services independently. I'm able to travel like on my own, but do also have like a physical disability. And so I'm limited in some of the things I'm able to do. And so one of those things is I'm not able to feed myself. And so I went to my church service, and they were doing communion that day. And I went by myself, not realizing that they were doing communion that day, and was not able to like participate in the communion. I couldn't take the drink or take the bread. So I shared how, it was kind of an uncomfortable situation for me, because especially now with COVID, you don't really want to ask people that you are not as familiar with, or just the person next to you to like, feed you something. Everyone's keeping this distance now. And even under normal circumstances, you may just not want to put yourself in that position to ask someone you're not familiar with. And so one of the things I suggested is, if they have a planned communion schedule, that, they could put that on their website, or if they know ahead of time, they can reach out specifically to those individuals in the congregation who might need assistance. And a couple weeks after that, I actually received a phone call from my church, and they told me that they were planning to do communion. And I just thought it was just so nice that they did that. But it's definitely even those little things like that, that I think, people don't think about when you're going to a worship service. How to, at what point do we kind of break tradition to care more about the congregation and the people that are involved in the church? And it's a challenge for a lot of churches.
That's a really neat story, and so easy to see, like, just speaking up and telling them what your needs are. It's created change so quickly, and people were open to that change. I think it's just awesome, because a lot of times I don't think people even realize that that's what's going on, and they don't mean it out of to make anybody upset or anything.
Yeah.
They just really don't realize it until you bring it to their attention. They're like, oh my gosh, why didn't you say something? Like, I could have totally helped you, And so it's just breaking that ice and then being like, hey, this is what I need. So funny story. I think it's funny we're talking about church this week, because I'm really active in mine. And I actually teach Sunday school to our children's church. So I'm serving in my church, and I love being at my church. It's just a very open space, and everybody's super welcoming and accommodating. But I'm getting rebaptized as an adult because I was baptized before I could speak as a child. And so I felt like to grow my faith, I should rebaptize now that I'm able to speak and make a decision on my own. But we do tub baptisms. And I float because of my disability. And I'm like, I can't get in the tub and then I'm going to float. And I just don't, this is going to be a disaster. And so the pastors at the church called me and they were like, we have an idea. We're going to hold you down and we're going to make sure you're seated and we're going to, we're going to have 4 or 5 people pick you up and put you in the tub. And they had a whole plan. I didn't have to plan anything. And I was like, this is the first time that I've ever felt like they were just like, yeah, Sarah, we've got this. And I'm like, okay, like that made me feel so like a part of the church. I'm like, oh, I'm noticed, even though I go to a church of about 2,000, they're like, oh no, we can do this. We have all these people. We have so many men that can lift you up. And I'm like, okay, I'm kind of nervous for my own self, but they didn't seem nervous at all. So it's just having them aware. And I think being open to getting creative, like, I just think that's so interesting, but I kind of want to know both of your perspectives. So a lot of times I post a lot about faith on my social media and how that kind of drives the forefront of my life. But a lot of people with disabilities, I feel like, come back and say like they're uncomfortable with faith because people always pray for healing. Anybody have any comments on that? I have kind of my own comment, but I want to kind of see how you guys feel about it because I feel like not a lot of younger people with disabilities actually are involved in church as much as I think they could potentially be because of that like stigma, I guess, that goes around. So what are your thoughts on that?
Hold on just one second. I just would be interested because Mandi mentioned the fact that she needed some assistance with feeding herself. So can you give us a little background about how your disability affects you in your daily life?
Sure, yeah. Yeah, so I have a disability called arthrogryposis. So I am not able to walk. I use a wheelchair and I have very limited use of my hands and my arms. It's pretty much a neuromuscular disability. I was born with it, so something I've had my whole life. And because of that, I have learned to adapt a lot of things. So I use my mouth for a lot of things like writing and typing. But I use a motorized wheelchair. So I guess it is a visible, outside of Zoom, it is a visible disability. So, I use a wheelchair and, I'm not able to walk and like I said, not able to do some of my activities of daily living, feeding myself, and I need assistance with showering and, transferring from one place to another and things like that. But I feel like, whenever I talk about my disability, it sounds so limiting, but then I say things like, oh, I travel independently, which I do. And, I'm the leader of a nonprofit and very involved in my church. And so I do a lot of things independently, just differently, which I'm sure you guys have talked about a million times on this podcast. But yeah, that's pretty much how it affects me.
Gee, it sounds like somebody I know. Wink, wink, and I'm not. Just
we
saying.
have the same thing.
I thought we might actually. So cool.
Yeah. And I love your comment about people say I'm really independent. I totally get it. Yes, we have a physical disability, but man, we try to do everything on our own at least once. And
yes, for sure.
Or figure out really strange ways of doing things, using our household items as grabbers or whatever we need. So I think it's cool. But yeah, I have the same thing. So our viewers are very familiar with arthrogryposis, which is awesome.
Great. Good. And I did want to answer your question, Sarah, about kind of my view on being involved in the church and disability. So I actually did a few workshops called Breaking Biblical Barriers. And it was about this exact thing, is that I do think you're right. I've had those experiences, especially growing up, where I would go to church. It would all be great until I got called up, to the altar, and people were putting oil on me and, praying over me and praying for healing. One of the things that I focus on in that workshop is a book called The Disabled God. If you haven't heard of it or read it, I would encourage you to check it out. But it really has helped me kind of shape my view and reconcile having a disability with also being a person of faith. And it's something that really did take a lot of kind of thought and prayer, because for me, it was kind of like, oh, I must be broken in some way, or like, it was kind of like two spectrums, where one was like, oh, I'm especially special because I have a disability, or I'm like lost and forgotten because I have a disability. And I kind of had to figure out how to reconcile that. And one of the, I guess, most influential points that the book makes, and that the author kind of shared a lot, she passed away, but when she was alive, is just the fact that after Jesus was resurrected, he still had the wounds from being on the cross and being crucified, and how his physical body would not be considered perfect by today's standards, and how he technically would have been considered disabled, still having the holes in his hands and in his feet. And that for me was very profound in helping me to kind of shape my understanding of how I fit into the faith story. So, I've also read a lot about the difference between healing and curing, and how curing is about the physical or physiological change that can happen, whereas healing has more to do with your heart and like your spiritual state. And when you look at, miracles in the Bible and healings that Jesus did, it was always first about the spiritual side of things. He was always healing a person's heart, or trying to help society see them as a whole person again, and the physical healings would come after he would do that. And a lot of times the physical healing was so that people would be able to see symbolically what he did on the inside for them. So that's my perspective. That's kind of the stance that I've taken, is that I don't need to like be physically cured, because I have been able to like have that reconciliation with God on a spiritual level.
That's awesome. And the book title one more time, and then I'll have Angie talk.
Yeah, it's called The Disabled God.
I love books. So Angie and I are very avid readers. So we definitely want to.
That's awesome.
Same here.
Yeah.
On my end, I would say that I agree with a lot of what you're saying there, Mandy. I would also say that I have a tendency to believe that our God is a God of great grace, and that my disability allows for his grace to be seen, not only by me, but by those around me. And so I tend to have this feeling that I am a vehicle, that I'm responsible for having a strong faith because I'm a vehicle of his grace. And so I have to make myself like a conduit for his grace to come in, so that his grace can be seen through me and my situation, and within my situation. So it's not about myself personally as much as allowing God's grace to be seen through. And I feel like if he did heal me, I feel like that's part of the reason why he has not chosen to, because it's not that I'm less of a person, but that my story has a part of his story to tell about the power of grace. And so if I try to sit there and compare myself to, because there have been other people that have been physically healed and all that kind of stuff, and if you start trying to compare, like, well, maybe if you had, like, I had someone that was in my life that was part of a prayer group where they laid on their hands on you and all that kind of stuff, which I'm not saying anything about how anyone just decides to express their faith. Please don't get me wrong. If that's something that works for you, that's great. However, I also believe that your journey with God is a very personal thing, and your relationship with God is also a very personal thing. So I don't feel like if he chooses not to heal me, technically, that my faith is in any way weaker than your faith. It just means that he has a different plan for my life and expressing his will in my life. So
Yeah, I think that's good too. I didn't mean for my question to be like, against any type of prayer or anything like that. That wasn't kind of where I was going with that. But I just had a lot of people with disabilities say it makes them uncomfortable when people say, hey, can I pray for you? And, I'd like to pray for you to be healed. And a lot of us, I feel like, are so okay with who we are that we're not looking for that, right? Like, we love the body that we've been given and the life that we have and all that we can do for God while we're here. And so it's just like, it comes across a little bit like, I'm not, sometimes I'm like, well, I'm not sick. I feel like when you pray for healing, sometimes you're praying for somebody who's sick, right? And I'm not sick. I just look different. So it would be different, if I had something else, some kind of illness that was making me sick inside that I needed that healing for, but I'm totally healthy. I just look different. Just like Mandi said that Jesus looked different after, right? And so he was still just as much of a person as everybody else and still could spread God's message and all of that. So I just think it was just an interesting topic. It's come up a lot lately. I've just heard a lot of people say like it makes them uncomfortable and why do people always want to pray for my healing? And I think it's just they want to do what they think is right and they don't really know. But it's just like we just look different. We're not sick or anything at all. We just, our bodies are different than your body. So
yeah, well, there's like a lot of like history and how like disability is viewed in the church too, and just different views of disability. And I think the more traditional view, when you're not reading the Bible with like a disability lens, is like disability was either considered like a punishment for like sin or the sin of your family. And because of that, I think that's where a lot of that comes from, is kind of carrying that concept down the line. But again, when you like, talking about grace and you look at the New Testament and you look at like all of the things Jesus did and, the fact that he came to forgive sin, we no longer go by all of those like Old Testament kind of things anymore. So it's just really a shift in perspective. And I agree with you also, Sarah, what you said earlier, that I think some of it is just a lack of awareness. Like, my church was not intentionally trying to be exclusive of me with communion or, the various other things. They were just never confronted with the need to make those changes. And so I think it is like just a big awareness thing. The only thing that I also just wanted to like address with like the church and disability is that I think there's often a misunderstanding on what like true inclusion means and what inclusion looks like. I think a lot of churches who have like disability ministries or they have special programs for individuals with disabilities, like those are all great. And I think there's a space for that in the same way that there's a space for women's groups or men only groups or young adult groups. Like I do think there's a space to kind of clump people together who have something in common or something similar, but I don't think it should stop there. And I think that a lot of churches have gotten comfortable with saying like, oh, we are, disability friendly because we have this like one group, but then that's like the only space that those people with disabilities are really welcomed or a part of. And so that inclusion has to really like transcend all ministries, like Angie was saying, whether it's, on the worship team or going on missions trips and things like that. That's what true inclusion looks like when it transcends everything. It's not just this separate group of like, that you're like putting people together in.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. Inclusion is really important, but it's a lot for somebody to understand. Because for a long time, our society has been like, oh, make it accessible so that somebody can get to it, but never, how do we actually include them in the actual activity? That's a whole nother story that, our society hasn't really grown up learning. We're just kind of integrating that now. So now it's about us being like, hey, this is how you can include me. And then let's continue this for the future so that we can include other people in. And I think that's really important. Any mission trips that you've ever been on? I was just curious. I thought about when we were talking about mission trips. Have you ever taken any mission trips, Mandi?
I have not, mostly for all of the reasons we like talked about here. A lot of mission trips, I've never felt like there was a place for me. The church that I'm in now, I think, they would be open to having more of those discussions, but in previous churches that I've been a part of, I've never felt like there was really like a place for me or kind of the opportunity. I've done, I guess, what would be considered like local missions, but never been able to like go overseas or anything like that and do a mission trip.
Yeah, I haven't either, but I really would love to. That's something I'd really like to do. Angie, what other questions do you have, or do we want to kind of shift towards the service side? Oh, you're
I
muted.
think
Okay.
I am now. I am unmuted. Sorry, I did not do that very well. Not very smooth transition. I apologize for that. But I feel like there was a question that, I want to go back just a minute to something that we touched on a little bit earlier, which was we have all talked a lot about physical healing and physical, like, let's pray for your physical healing. But something that I think Mandi also brought up earlier was the idea of spiritual healing. And I think a lot of people, when they say, I'll pray for you, they're thinking more physically, right? Like, I need more spiritual healing in a lot of areas of weakness of spirituality than I do for physical healing. So when I go and when I do things like mission trips and these things, or go on pilgrimages of any sort in a spiritual nature, I'm not looking to be physically healed. I am like really rejoice when I feel more whole. And when I say whole, I mean in a spiritual nature, not, or I guess I should say at peace with where I am in my walk with Christ, not with anyone else, just in my personal walk with Christ. So, and I have a tendency, and I think, like, people, going back to our conversation, I think people have a tendency to believe that when you're talking about wholeness or healing, that you think it's physical, and it's not. And when you're talking in the religious or spiritual realm, that's not always what happens.
Yeah. I would also just say that I think like most of our experience like here is kind of in the physical disability world. I think that people with like intellectual disabilities and people with like in other invisible disabilities also face such a different set of challenges too, especially in the church. Because it's easier to gauge our understanding of, what's being taught. We can like regurgitate, so to speak, Bible verses and really engage. But, it's so important to like just remember that like we weren't called to, I guess, try to identify or try to select who's worthy of like hearing the message or who's worthy of being involved in the church. And so like our job is to really deliver the message and then allow the Holy Spirit to do the rest. And so, I've seen it too often where, someone who maybe is nonverbal or, doesn't have like the same intellectual abilities as, other people in the church are kind of left by the wayside. And so I just wanted to like also mention that just because I do think it's important. I know it's like there are additional challenges for people who aren't just physically disabled, but have like those other invisible and intellectual disabilities.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think it all just, in my opinion, at this point, stems to communication. And do we have people advocating in the church for inclusion for those who may not be able to speak for themselves? Or even in our situations, like, are we speaking up and communicating what those needs are so that it can be different in the future for more people to be included? I know at my church, that's something I advocated for because we have a few children with intellectual disabilities and they were going to make a separate class. And I said, absolutely not. I'll be in every class I need to be in, but I want them to be with all of our students. And so they're all integrated. They're not in a separate class. They're all together in their grade level where they are supposed to be, getting the same lesson that every other student is getting. And I think that just makes for a better experience for them, but it also makes a great experience for our students that don't have a disability because they're learning about disability awareness at the same time. And so it's just like a big win, to be able to make that community. But that was something that I myself had to advocate for those children because they couldn't speak up for that. And sometimes the parents are like, oh yeah, okay, you know, their behavior is a little too much, maybe we can. And I'm like, no, 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 no. Like, we need to put your child where they belong. Like, I want them to feel as included as possible because I know they understand. They just can't vocalize what's going on like everybody else can. And so I just think it's that having that communication. Like I said, we're just not, we don't know what inclusion looks like. You know, we haven't had
Yeah.
for years. Like we've had the ADA, and accessibility looks like ramps instead of stairs. Like, okay, but what does inclusion actually look like? You know, and it looks different
Yeah.
for everybody, but we can kind of start that movement for what we know, and then it can build from there for people who are able to, you know, advocate
Yeah.
for what they need.
I mean, I think it would be like ideal for all churches to like have that as a position, like a disability leader or a disability pastor or whatever. I mean, you have youth pastors and your lead pastor, and you know, I think, you know, you have like the leader of women and men and all of that. I think that it's worth, you know, churches looking into that as like a role that can help
Right.
with being more inclusive, even if it's just like a diversity and inclusion leader, you know, whether it's disability or, you know, becoming more like ethnically diverse or whatever. I think that having that as like a role and someone who's dedicated to that would be amazing to see in churches.
That's a great idea. That is a great idea.
And I think that, you know, like and you brought something up, Sarah, about the ADA and stuff. It should be mentioned that the ADA defines churches don't have to follow the ADA because under the ADA they're considered to be like a club. So the same principles of the ADA do not apply in religious situations unless you have like a Mother's Day Out program or something like that that is being offered in the building. Then that program has to be ADA compliant. But the religious building itself does not have to go under the same standards. Just because you brought that up, you should know, which I've always struggled with because I'm like, of all places to be accessible, you should have accessibility to your God or to your, you know, place of worship.
Yeah, to that point though, I also like think that it should be the one place where you don't need to have something like written into law, right? Like it should be the one place that like from a spiritual perspective wants to be welcoming to all. And I know there, unfortunately, like church and politics get so meshed together and mixed up, and there's so much involved in that. But you know, I always say that like I've been to churches that were not accessible from like a physical standpoint, but were accessible spiritually, where people there really cared, people wanted to be helpful, you know, people were willing to carry me up flights of stairs if they had to. And I have felt closer to the people, the community, and my faith in those spaces than the ones that are, you know, just trying to skid by with being compliant by like ADA standards or having like the limited accessibility. And so I always say like it really does start with the people first. Like, you know, anything can really be overcome if you have people with like the right heart attitude and people who are willing. And so that, like I said, that's the one thing I love about my church. Like our altar right now is not accessible, but my pastor, probably like the third week that I attended the church, I made mention to somebody about it not being accessible, and it got to my pastor, and he actually approached me and he said, you know, this is a project we're going to like raise funds for and we're going to like work on. And that alone made me continue to go there, even though the church is not fully accessible, you know? So I 100% agree. I just think it really matters, like the people, like you have to start with changing those heart attitudes in order to get to all the other stuff.
Yeah.
Very true. Very true.
Yeah. And I really think within the church, that's like the best place to start changing those heart attitudes, like you called them. Like a lot of our, you know, a lot of the people in my church are so wanting to serve, and they want to know what other ways they can serve people and love people and do everything that they can for God. And that's like the best place to start, because that people are always looking for ways to help and become more involved. And I just think it's just a neat community. And I know for me, it's a community where I really feel like I fit in, which is kind of different to say. I know it's not like that for everybody, but when you find that fit, you're just like, yeah, this is right. This is the right place where I belong. And it's a really great feeling. So Angie, anything else to add? We actually are getting close to our time, so we don't actually have to switch topics. But anything else we can kind of close around with before we head out for the night?
No, I just want to say thank you very much for bringing this topic to the forefront, because it's really not something, I mean, it's definitely something that needs to be, there needs to be more conversation around it and more consideration around it. But it's honestly something that I hadn't thought about myself. So now you have got me in such a mindset that I'm going to go and figure out how I can better help educate my faith community, and help also, be grateful for the faith community and how welcoming and open-minded they are. And if you, I also want to say, just before we close, Mandi, do you have any handles, Instagram, any of those things that you want to shout out and let us know what you're doing, that you might want people aware of and stuff like that?
Yeah, thanks. So on Instagram, I am Mandi Box Beauty. That's pretty much my handle, and it's MandiBox. And then I'm the same thing on Facebook as well, Mandi Box Beauty. And I do have a podcast. It's called Find Your Beautiful Life Through the Eyes of a Christian Disabled Woman. And it's under Mandi Frantz. So been on a little bit of a hiatus. I think I last recorded in April, but I talk a lot about how my personal disability story can really translate to the experience of a lot of other people with disabilities. So I share a lot of my own story there, and definitely touch on some of the faith things, as well as other areas that I've experienced challenges and where I'm trying to advocate for change. So you can check all of that out.
Awesome. We will add the links. So if you'll send me the links, we'll add them to the end of this video. It'll be in the description for all of our viewers on both the podcast sites and on YouTube, so that everybody can find them. That way they can follow along. And we'd love to share your podcast. So if you have an episode that you love, that's your favorite one or anything like that, we'd love to spotlight that too. I think that would be great, just to keep people actively listening and more involved, and it can get you more followers, and maybe you can create some more podcasts, since you said you were on a little bit of a break. So we can get more followers to get you some more action there too. But thank you so much, Mandi, for being a part today. I really, truly love the conversation. It is such an important topic, and a lot of times I feel like it's shied away from. And I think today we just really created that open, safe space to have that conversation. And I think that's so important. So thank you so much for coming on and being our guest. And I think we're going to wrap up for the day, everybody. But thank you so much for watching and being our followers here for Real Women, Real Life. We are so happy that you continue to follow our story. Don't forget to subscribe to our channels and watch all of our podcasts as they come out. And if there is a topic that you would like us to discuss, feel free to message us or send us an email at realwomenreallife@gmail.com, and we can go ahead and bring that topic on in one of our upcoming podcasts. All right, ladies, anything else before we go?
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity for the conversation. Looking forward to seeing all that you guys do too.
Absolutely.
And remember, the future is inclusion.
That's right. And the future is inclusion. Thanks, guys, so much. Have a great day.